Hey everyone, good evening. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of New Ideas, formerly the Politically Homeless podcast. With me is uh, my recurring guest and analyst expert on national security issues, Jared Nyquist. He is, again, national security analyst, an author, and blogger. He is definitely a first-class expert on the issues of Russia and China. Some time has lapsed between Jeff and I having a show. So since we have a new administration in Washington, D.C. that took office a little over a week ago, I figured we'd talk about the incoming Trump administration, his national security policies, his nominees, and then we're going to talk about the election in Romania. Welcome back, Jeff. How you doing?
All right. It's good to see you again, Nevin. Since you visited me here earlier this month, we're at the end of January. Trump has been inaugurated. I just want to say a lot of people were panicking. I got countless emails from people panicking, saying that, oh, they're going to do something. There's going to be violence. They're going to assassinate him. They're not going to let him be inaugurated president. I didn't think so. That wasn't going to happen, and it didn't. They really can't. There's a kind of sense of retreat, of a readjustment of the communist bloc's positions.
Well, since we're on that note about Trump, and thankfully, I mean, look, obviously we don't condone or wish assassination. Thank God nothing has happened to him or his family or so far his nominees and picks, whatever your political stance is. And moving forward, it looks like some of his nominees are, some of whom have been confirmed, are pretty solid as far as the Russia-China issue, like a CIA director and General Kellogg and Secretary of State Marco Rubio and others. So did you want to talk about what a Trump national security policy looks like, as well as some of his nominees, some of whom have been confirmed already?
Yeah, it looks like I'm told that Tulsi Gabbard there might not be the votes to confirm her. And I think that's just as well. I think she could have had a change of heart. She might be a sincere person, but even then, it's a wrong pick for intelligence. I understand the principle of having somebody as a watchdog, somebody over the agencies that's really loyal to you and trust, but you have to have somebody that can be a bridge between the agencies and the administration, somebody that both sides trust. That's not easy. So I don't think Gabbard can be that person. I could be wrong. It would be nice to see that she could do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, my concerns with her, at least up until recently, is her apologia for the Russians, including their invasion of eastern Ukraine, her downplaying of the threat from China, Russia, her condemnation of Trump's tariffs against China back in 2020 when she was running for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination, his quote unquote trade war against China. She had some questionable trip to Syria. Look, she's addressed these concerns in the hearings, but I'm a little skeptical of her sudden change of heart. People usually don't have a sudden change of heart that quickly on critical issues.
Yeah, that's the thing about her. Some people that work with her in Congress, and people are bad mouthing her. It might be unfairly, saying that she was very ambitious, and look at how young she is for this position. Not really qualified. It leaves one with a mildly distrustful feeling, and why Trump picked her. I mean, Trump is a very cagey strategist. He could have picked her, knowing she was going to be rejected, because I really couldn't imagine the Senate confirming her, and I don't think they are now that we see what we're seeing. But that sets Trump up maybe for who he really wants. That could be the strategy.
Yeah, we don't know because we're not on the inside, and ultimately what will happen is if former members of his administration years from now write the memoirs, we'll be able to have a better look and see what his intentions are, or if he's just shooting from the hip in a disorganized
Well,
fashion. We'll never know.
that's the thing is that, one thing we should touch on is the Canada uproar, and it's not being discussed in the American media or by conservatives. They wave their hands, but I went to Toronto in September. I met a lot of Canadian conservatives there at the Conference on Arctic Security and the Arctic situation. And I was with the Mackenzie Institute there. I spoke. I sat next to Canada's former ambassador to Russia. Um, they're all upset because Trump, it was a joke, when he met with Trudeau, you can be governor of Canada when we annex it. Does anybody, you're supposed to laugh. And it's Canadian conservatives like the Premier of Ontario calling elections saying, I need to strengthen my position to fight Trump. It's like there always was. I was always disturbed. There's a undercurrent of anti-Americanism in Canada, not just with the left, not just with the Quebec, the French in Quebec, the French Canadians, who also hate the English Canadians. The problem is there is a general resentment towards the United States. And Trump has kind of driven it out in the open. And is it a mistake? Or was Trump following the law of provocation, bringing it out so maybe other people could deal with it? I wonder. I'm hopeful, but I'm also worried because Canada's important and there's people in Canada saying we should align with China. Good grief. You're a realist. You know all kinds of things. What do you think of this?
Well, it's hard to say. On the surface, I don't think it's particularly smart. You have to be very careful who your audience is. Look, I like joking around too, but you have to also just know your audience, and you don't want to come across as the ugly American because already the Russians and the Chinese are really taking advantage of the situation. Will gain a propaganda victory. We used to understand winning hearts and minds. But for decades upon decades, especially since we've convinced ourselves that the Cold War has ended, we've really lost the plot when it comes to really winning hearts and minds in this information propaganda war that we're locked in and have been locked in with Russia and China. But to address your point on, there are voices in Canada that have suggested aligning with China. That's a huge mistake. Just because America might appear like a colonialistic buffoon, beware of China. Their Belt and Road is nothing but extreme forms of covert totalitarian colonialism, I would argue, because once you get in with China and Russia, it's not always easy to get out of that embrace, and they're playing for keeps. They want a world dominated by a totalitarian state. So what would you rather take, Jeff? A totalitarian collectivist state or a clumsy American republic / plutocracy, or whatever you want to call it?
I believe in a republic, however problematic republics are. I'm not, Machiavelli's discourses, I think, are his greatest work. And he pointed out in the discourses on the first 10 books of Livy that a republic, however cumbersome, however problematic, is the most powerful form of state and government, and that and it preserves liberty, and it has amazing resilience, and it can mobilize a society in its defense in a good cause like nothing else. I think that's true. I think the incredible history of Rome, the history of the American Republic, the history of mixed monarchy in the UK to some extent reflects that. The autocratic governments of China, of Russia, of Iran are weak. They're very nimble. They can maneuver very quickly. They can do amazing conspiracies and strategies and have long-term goals, but they're fragile. And our society, for all of its stumbles and problems, it has this. It's very strong. It's very resilient. It's an interesting combat between the autocracies of the Eastern despotisms and ourselves, and with the whole communist left and now the right wing, subversion that they're doing. it's interesting to watch for sure.
It is interesting. I mean, both the free republics or limited monarchies versus totalitarian states, they have their strengths, but they also have their weaknesses. That's quite true. There's also another unintended, perhaps unintended consequence that I think, oddly enough, is positive as a result of the fallout by Trump over Denmark/Greenland, Canada, Panama, is there's also increased calls within Canada and Western Europe for more defense and industrial self-sufficiency. That's what they're talking about, and I think that's actually a good thing. It's not to say that free nations should not have peaceful commerce and correct diplomatic relations and a certain degree of defense cooperation. But I think, and one of the reasons, many reasons why I supported Trump back in 2016, at least so vocally, was his point where other countries really have to become more self-sufficient with their defense, America has to become more self-sufficient with its industrial production. And I think there is I would argue, a good effect coming from this where Canada and Western European countries could become more self-sufficient from a defense and industrial point of view, which will allow America to focus on building up its strengths. I mean, is that a far-fetched theory that I have? Maybe he's doing it on purpose to trigger these countries to become self-defense. Who the heck knows?
Oh, yeah, no, he did already. Look,
man.
The General Secretary of NATO already said that he did that, and that he recognized he did it, and he recognized that Trump was right in doing it. The Secretary General of NATO admitted it and said Trump was right to do it, to provoke them into. He said NATO would not have as strong defenses now, as weak as they are, if Trump hadn't done that in his first term. So if you got the Secretary General of NATO saying that, admitting that Trump was right, Trump is really, despite all the hate aimed at him and the everything, even with this Canada thing, he turns things around, and he's the only Western politician that really uses the art of provocation by saying outrageous things, by doing things that appear to be mistakes. He draws out the poisons, and then other people have to deal with it. Other people have to work it through. The anti-Americanism in Canada on the right, I saw it, and I was always disturbed by it. Now it's in the open. Now can we have the discussion? Does Canada really want to go with China? That's the thing. You better not. And we're in World War III if that happens. I mean, we really are. And Canada's not going to be on the winning side, because I think the Chinese and Russians, they're lining up for a loser. I mean, the millions of people, tens of millions of billions of people will die if that happens. I pray it does not, but it looks like that's where we're headed. I got to say, it looks just like that's where we're headed.
Well, I mean, we'll see. And as you said earlier, I mean, the Russians and the Chinese, they're going to have to play a very careful game. I mean, when you look at some of Trump's nominees, and look, there are things in my writings, in my interviews where I've been very, very critical of Trump and elements of his first administration, but he also had some very solid accomplishments. I just dropped a piece on the Trump's positive and negative foreign policy positions. And when you compare to Obama and Clinton's Russia and China policies, Trump was an absolute godsend. So they're going to have to be very careful. I think they're going to use several approaches, the Chinese and the Russians. They're going to use elements of the right here in the United States, as you pointed out, perhaps Canada as well, including the Marxist-Leninist element of the left. They're going to use whatever allies within the Democratic and Republican parties that they could get, as well as business. And they're going to try and use those pressure points. And they're going to use the sort of dissidents here in the United States who are very critical of the military-industrial complex. That's why the Russians are so gung-ho about Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, and I think one other appointee, the name escapes me right now, but Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard, the Russians are very bullish. But on the other hand, Jeff, what is also significant, and this is going to be in an upcoming essay that'll be dropping soon on my Substack, I'm also been gathering evidence. Julia Davis of the Russia media monitor does a yeoman's work in really assembling all of this Russian propaganda and quotes and papers by the Russian leadership. And the Russians are not entirely, at least publicly, happy with Trump either. One Russian general stated quite clearly that Trump is not going to be good for us. So we have to really wait and see. We have to wait and see how everything congeals together, and then go from there. It could be that the Russians, when they attempt to sue for peace with Ukraine, if that really gets off the ground, they may also, and I think you and I and Trevor Loudon and I have discussed this, they may have to go into their own version of glasnost and perestroika to revivify the Putin dictatorship and its United Russia Party, which...
Well, it's going to be, Nevin, if they do that, it's going to be post-Putin. It's not going to be, Putin's not going to be able to pull it off. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that I heard before the pandemic, a Ukrainian that I know went to Moscow, was invited by what was it, Moscow One television channel, mm-hmm. to be on TV. Hadn't been on there since perestroika, since early Yeltsin years. Was really shocked, found a kind of attitude in the Russian media. Under the surface, he said, it was very subtle. They were tired of Putin. They're tired of Putinism, tired of the move, the gradual move towards neo-Sovietism. And of course, a year ago, last November, the Russian government announced re-Sovietization.
Yes.
And people don't even, the American media doesn't say, oh, Russia's Sovietizing. The customs union was just with the attempt that Putin, with Yanukovych, before the 2014 Euromaidan revolution, nobody says, hey, wait a minute, Putin's customs union with Kazakhstan and Ukraine, which are the two biggest republics of the Soviet Union outside of the Russian Republic, that it was a mask for beginning to reform the Soviet Union. Belarus is already in military union with Russia. They add those two, they have the core of the Soviet Union back. They just need the rest of the stands, rest of the Central Asians and Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, and they've got it back. And then they can move on the Baltic states. That is the idea. Put the Soviet Union, the Humpty Dumpty of the Soviet Union, back together again. Thank goodness they stumbled in Ukraine. Thank goodness some of the Central Asians are starting to buck the process. Well, how many will be assassinated, right? How many killings? How much intrigue is left? I don't know. It's interesting. The Soviet Union is not going to be easy to be put back together. We can see that now. This was always their plan, by the way. I've heard defectors have said this. They pulled it apart in a way that would allow them to put it back together again, but their best laid plans of mice and men, right? It wasn't so easy. The Euromaidan revolution was the thing that really gummed up the works for them. That's why they've deployed this huge army and lost 1 million dead and wounded and prisoners in Ukraine, according to, I think maybe John Mosher would agree with that number, the military historian. I'd have to ask him, but there's some people that believe that's the number, not 500,000, 1 million. Now they're throwing North Korean troops, communist North Korean troops into the mix.
Well, now there's even been some leaked video on social media of Chinese soldiers. I'm trying to find this quote by Oleg Shinin, who is a Soviet-era apparatchik, and he had mentioned, this was back when Putin, of course, Putin was still the dictator of the Soviet Union, and where he mentions the same thing, that the Union of Soviet Communists, we are rebuilding the Soviet Union, and that Putin was well aware of this. This was actually on a communist website that I saw years and years and years ago. So this is something that
recently, I don't think it was you, it was someone else pointing out to me, I think maybe it was Johnny, or no, it was Alex, pointing out to me that in the German left-wing press, one of the communists was saying that the Russian regime is not just a Soviet continuation regime, it is communist. and just openly stating it. I mean, they're aligned. Russia, the Russian Federation is aligned with every and helping and working with every communist country in the world, including sending enormous amounts of grain to communist Cuba, troops in communist Venezuela, building basing infrastructure in Daniel Ortega, the Sandinistas, Nicaragua, receiving North Korean troops and artillery shells, and receiving huge machine tools from communist China. Look, it's the communist bloc. Why is this so hard? Why can't we admit that we got tricked by Russia and China in different ways in the 80s and 90s, especially with the so-called fall of communism? This is why the election in Romania is such a scandal. It's a scandal because the idiots in Europe and conservative idiots in the United States and even in Poland accept Georgescu as a conservative when he's right out of the Ceausescu milieu. You know, he is from the Securitate, the secret police structures of the communist regime. He's their creature. He was sent to the West under the communist regime on a mission to understand how he could develop this image, right?
Yep. Well, and getting back here, I found the quote. I don't mean to over focus on this. This is on the northstarcompass.org, which is a communist website. And they reproduced a message on the 12th anniversary of the 1991 referendum on the Soviet Union. And this noted, the plans for the resurrection of the USSR are well known to Putin and the present regime, and are outlined in the documents of the UCP-CPSU, which is a sort of breakaway.
No, the CPSU is the Communist Party Soviet
Union.
It's not a breakaway anything, and that's, by the way, they give it the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. There are documents, and people have said, no, that's just a cover name. It's really the Communist Party Soviet Union is still there. It's the Communist Party Soviet Union underground that is trying to come back to power in Ukraine, trying to dominate the undercurrents in Central Asia, is secretly behind the leadership in Azerbaijan, and is trying to keep a lid on Georgia that wants to break it free, and is definitely behind Lukashenko, who just supposedly won re-election in Belarus, right? That freaking Stalinist clown, where in that country the KGB still is called the KGB. Hello, it's still the KGB. They didn't even hide the name anymore.
Well, you take a look, and you and I have written about this. I wrote about it a little bit in my essay on the Ukraine conflict on Substack. You have Hungary, which is under control of a strong ally of Putin and China, where Hungary has become a base for Chinese and Russian operations. It's economically very tied to the Russians. You look at Viktor Orban. In some ways, Viktor Orban reminds me of the role Andreas Papandreou, if you remember him from the 1980s, when Greece was in NATO under him, and it was a very unreliable NATO member. Well, Hungary is, in my opinion, potentially a very unreliable NATO member.
Oh, good grief! It is. Look, when your defense ministry is unlustrated and full of the GRU spies, and when Orban himself even uses trained communist dialectics in his speeches and expositions, winking to the old communist structures that, oh yeah, what a conservative he is. This blending of the right and the left. Look, the whole idea is the red-brown alliance here. You bring the fascist right and the communist left together in this red-brown coalition. It's clearly what they've done in a lot of places. I mean, what was Milosevic about in Serbia, Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia? What is Orban, right? What is Putin? What is Xi when he introduces great Han, nationalism or racism mixes it with his Maoism, right? Why does he have a statue? Why has he commissioned Xi Jinping, the president of China, statues of Stalin and Mao and Hitler to be revered? Why Hitler? Because Hitler was really an important off-again, on-again ally of the communists. The Red-Brown Alliance is what started World War II. Hitler and Stalin, the people forget the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939, that's what started the war. They invaded Poland and partitioned it together, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Remember? Hitler invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939. Stalin invaded on the 17th.
Well,
The Allies
talk
declared war on Hitler, but then
Yeah.
they thought, oh no, we can't declare war on Hitler and Stalin, we'll be sunk. So Stalin got away and he was just laughing all the way to the bank. Then
Well,
Stalin went and invaded the Baltic states and Finland and took a big chunk out of Romania and invaded Persia too, and had a little dust up with Japan. So, at Kalkin Gulf. So the idea that the far right and the far left can't get together to smash republics, to smash the free world. That's how World War II started. And that, I believe, is what alarms me, that World War III is about to start, because this Red-Brown Alliance appears all over the map, in Latin America, in Europe. Look at the Golden Dawn Party in Greece. It's a real Nazi party. Why are they aligned with the communists? Why are they following the Moscow line like the really straight-on communists do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, Golden Dawn, they are aligned with Putin. Their website, I looked at 10 years ago, and the English language version, they clearly are aligned with the Russians and even the Chinese, if I recall correctly. The far right, far left, I don't even necessarily like calling them far right, because there is some overlap between the so-called far right and far left, because there is this authoritarian collectivist temperament. One is based on nation and or race, depending on which party, on the quote unquote right, and the left is based on primarily class, although they'll opportunistically use nationalism. Yes, as far back as the 1920s, the Soviet Union off and on aligned itself economically with Mussolini's fascist Italy, to the point of even giving vital supplies to help Mussolini conquer Ethiopia. You look at when the Soviets ordered the German Communist Party, then known as the KPD, align themselves with the Nazis, joined together in strikes. Their parliamentary deputies voted together on certain key legislations, political and economic. Why? To bring down the liberal Weimar Republic and to usher in national socialism, which they felt would basically be a thorn in the side of the West, and to break the order of the Treaty of Versailles. And then don't forget, not only did Napoleon and the Soviet Union made their German-Soviet non-aggression pact in 1939, but those Soviets, and this is very well documented, sent trainloads upon trainloads of minerals, oil, grain, all to Germany, to the point when the Axis forces were invading the Soviet Union, the German trains were still running to Germany. They still were doing their thing.
You mean the Soviet trains?
The Soviet trains, yes.
Well, yeah, the thing is, people don't realize when Germany invaded France, invaded Norway, invaded Denmark, invaded Holland, invaded Belgium, invaded France, bombed Great Britain. It was all done on petrol coming from the Soviet Union. It was done with raw materials. The German army was eating Ukrainian wheat from the Soviet Union. They were feeding their soldiers with Soviet grain. People don't realize that Hitler's war machine in 1940 that overran the West and put Britain almost to the point of surrender was fueled by the Soviet Union. And in America, when Roosevelt and others wanted to send help to Great Britain, who was striking in the American ports to prevent help from getting to Britain? It was communist-controlled unions trying to paralyze the ports in the U.S. so the U.S. couldn't help the British against the Nazis. Even though America was neutral, Roosevelt wanted to send food. They wanted to send help to Britain, however, on the sly. And the communist Stalin set the unions, the communists in the United States, to strike to prevent the help from reaching Great Britain.
Not only that,
communists were helping Hitler. And
Yes.
This is a big scandal. They have hid this for decades, literally. And the other thing they've hidden, which both, by the way, Putin And Gorbachev and Yeltsin refused to publicly say that we fed the Soviet Union. When Hitler then turned on Stalin, we were feeding them. We were giving them the aluminum to build their aircraft.
Yes.
The Soviet Union would have collapsed without our help in
They absolutely
1942.
would have.
It would
Yeah.
have collapsed.
They
They
would
would have lost the war in 1942 without our help.
Yeah.
And they will never, Gorbachev would not say this. And in fact, it was very frustrating for Western negotiators. It's in one of these books, I think, not 1 inch east, or whatever that book is, about the controversy that the NATO supposedly was made promises to the Soviets, which they weren't. That they had this horrible time. Gorbachev wouldn't admit how much we gave to the Soviet Union, but the people, bless her heart, Simona Pipko, she's got to be in her early 90s now. She grew up, and I've had conversations with her. She lived through that war period. She said all the Soviet people were living on spam. We're living on the only meat they got was from America, that those Soviet people needed in fighting that war, going through that war. It was, I remember the American spam and the American trucks and the American tanks and the aircraft and all of the things we gave to them. And Stalin hated us. He imprisoned American pilots.
Yep.
They took American prisoners of war and kept them. At the end of the war, didn't hand them back over. Diana West goes through this in her book, American Betrayal. Stalin was a foul partner in the war.
Oh, he absolutely was.
He was as bad as Hitler.
Yeah. Well,
he was Hitler's partner. He opened the cage and Hitler was he called him the icebreaker of the revolution. We're going to unleash Hitler on Europe. Right. He helped Hitler come to power. This is, when we look at the Georgescu, when we look at the right, if we look at some of the crazy people on the right in Europe, some of them are tied to Moscow, and it's no accident.
Well, because they want to destroy NATO. What their plan is to neutralize and break apart NATO. But getting back to some of the history, it is even worse. And I talk about this in my writings as well. In an upcoming series on my Substack, it's going to be a series called Myths of the Day. Myths of the Day, and one of the things that occurred during World War II is a large portion of the Lend-Lease weapons from the United States were stored and kept aside for future wars against Great Britain and the United States. And Viktor Kravchenko, who is an official, if not the head of the Soviet Purchasing Commission in Washington, D.C., testified to that fact. When you take a look, Stalin, the Soviets from 1941 to the mid-1940s levied tariffs on Lend-Lease aid from the United States. That's like beyond rude. That's like, really? You're right about the imprisonment of pilots within the Soviet Union. If you had unauthorized
American pilots, remember, American
pilots, that's
your
right.
Your ally, the Americans, who are so generous to you, and you are cruel to their pilots. You take them prisoner, and of course, it's covered up because it's embarrassing. It's covered up by the State Department.
It's the truth, unfortunately, and this is why when you have excessive engagement with totalitarian states, it's a very dangerous game. Now, moving past.
By the way, that compromises the officials that are involved in that engagement.
That's right. Absolutely.
And that's why Golitsyn, in his book, New Lies for Old, at the end of the book, he says, you got to disengage. You can't let them play these games with you. You can't economically help them. You can't feed them. You can't give them credits. You can't give them technology. You have to decouple from them and let them die. Let them collapse. Because really, the West, thinking that they're going to liberalize all the time over and over again. I was looking at one of the critics of this, some brilliant things written about this illusion that they are going to always liberalize. It was Natalie Grant wrote this book, Disinformation. Natalie Grant Ragel, one of the top experts on understanding the Soviet Union. This book was published posthumously this is a pre-publication version, but I was reading her last night, and she was saying, look, they're never going to, they're going to take whatever you give them, and they're just going to come back after you again. You are building them up over and over again, making the same mistake over and over again. This is the thing I fear that Trump will do. I hope he won't, because Trump has got good instincts, that he will press them to the wall and make sure that Russia cannot ever trick us again, get our technology, get our money, build themselves up and come after us and nuke us and wipe us out. Because I think that they're in a mess. They need time. They really need to buy time. They want us to remove the sanctions. No, don't do it. If they're going to nuke us, they're going to nuke us, because they're going to do it in the end anyway. And if they're weak and they're crumbling, they can't afford to try it because they know they'll die for sure. So I think this is we have to press hard. Or in 10 years from now, they will finally get it right and they'll bomb and invade us with the Chinese. The Chinese are setting up the invasion. They've infiltrated Canada. They've infiltrated Mexico. The Russians are in Mexico too. All these use of these mafias, all these American businessmen tied to China. We have to cut these ties. We have to. We can't feed our enemy anymore. They are going to hang us with the rope we sold them, just like Lenin told Karl Radek back, even if that's an apocryphal story, I don't think it is, back in 1920. It is the reality that this sick system, this sick state socialism, state cap, whatever you want to call it, this sick totalitarian system, because basically you've got this sickness, this mental disease of socialism, the belief that you can have a socialist society. And you have these criminals, these intellectual criminals and actual outright, political gangsters who grab onto it and say, oh, millions of people believe in this. We can build an empire on it. We can not just be bank robbers. We can own all the banks. We can loot everybody. We can control the world. Oh, look at this. Psychopaths crave victims. Psychopaths look at it and go, oh, we could be the heads of this. All these stupid people believe this, right? You look at, Karl Marx was either a malignant narcissist or a psychopath. Lenin was definitely a psychopath. And Stalin, all those murders, all that killing. If Kotkin says he wasn't a psychopath, really? What?
I don't buy that.
That's even more scary, that he was normal, right? There was a psychologist, American psychologist at the Nuremberg trial that committed suicide in the 1950s. And they went through his papers some years ago. I read his book about Nuremberg, and he said, oh, all these people are psychopaths. But in his notes, he said, no, they weren't. And he became close to Goering. And his real notes said he was disillusioned. Goering's not a psychopath, but he's a murderer. And that devastated the psychologist. He couldn't, this nightmare of evil, you can choose evil. Okay, you're not a psychopath, you just chose evil. You just think it's okay to kill people. That so terrified him that he couldn't live with it. Killed himself. I think in 1957, I try to remember the guy's name, but his book was striking, very interesting in my survey of this literature. But see, the thing is we can't, normal people, most of us are normal people, and we think, we don't want war, we don't want these horrible things. Why does this keep happening? We can have peace. If we, Rodney King, well, why can't we all just get along? It's because we're human beings and evil is real. And yeah, they're psychologically abnormal people, but then there's just evil people. They just make that choice. Well, okay, I got to be evil. It's an advantage. I'm going to do it. Maybe it hurts. Maybe I do feel a little guilty. Maybe I do feel a lot guilty sometimes, but I suppress it. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to do these things to people. This is reality. Look at all the people. And so you think that you're going to have utopia? You think that humanity's ever going to be free of these things? This is a point I want to make. Be an adult, be a grown-up. There is not going to be peace on earth. Humanity is just a struggle. We're going to struggle through periods of war and peace. There's going to be good times and bad. Not just, oh, it's so wonderful we can all go up to 600 pounds and just sit there and be fed by machines. No. Human nature is going to get in the way of that dream. Besides, it's hedonism. Human beings have souls. There's a lot more going on here than just satisfying your physical needs. This is we're a very complicated creature, human beings. So we have to be adults about it and realize, no, there's going to be wars. And as George Washington said, paraphrasing the Romans, if you want peace, prepare for war. It's what we haven't done.
Yep, I quoted that. You used that exact quote in my essay in Wilderness of Mirrors, which is my Substack page for sensible defense policy. I use Washington's exact quote, and he's exactly correct. Now, getting to, so we addressed the right-left alliances or far-right, far-left alliances. Let's get back to the Trump administration. You have some hopes, but some concerns. What do you see congealing with the Trump administration policy-wise, or is it too early to tell?
It's kind of early to tell. Look, I should say that people are already characterizing. We had John Robin characterizing this this administration, mischaracterizing it, and I think he did it sincerely, because he was reading the misreading of the administration from the Washington Post. The reality here, people are saying, oh, Trump has cut off Ukraine for military aid. And this is the Washington Post actually reported this. But then you have the Kiev Post saying, no, that's not right. The Ukrainians would know, by the way. The Ukrainians, the Kiev Post said, it's a confusion. Trump is having a 90-day moratorium on aid to foreign countries. But that doesn't include the emergency military aid to Ukraine.
Yeah, Ukraine, Israel, and South Korea were exempted. That's what I read.
Yeah, Israel too. And because these countries are under immediate military pressure, there's danger there. They're not, the United States, so Trump isn't an idiot. He's not pulling the rug out from under Ukraine or Israel. He's not doing that. Those are crucial fronts in stopping the axis of evil, if you want to borrow a term from George W. Bush. There is Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. Those are core axis of evil countries. That is what's pushing on us, on civilization. That's what's trying to drag us down, those countries, with a host of others that are run by communists and stooges and criminals attached to Russia and China, supported by Russia and China. People haven't fully awakened to this yet. But it's going to be impossible as time goes on to deny this is what's actually happening. And so, when you get to this point and you say, okay, well, Trump is still supplying it, and then you look at General Kellogg, who's going to the negotiate, and look at what General Kellogg has said in a year, last April, in which the second question to the interview was, Biden's really helping Ukraine. And he just read the riot act to the interviewer. No, he's not. Biden's aid to Ukraine has been token. Biden is not really helping Ukraine. Ukraine has struggled and did this heroically on their own with some help from some other small countries that really put their shoulder to the wheel. Countries like the Scandinavian countries, the Baltics, Poland under the Law and Justice Party, not under, I don't trust Tusk, and so on. And you see, the thing is that people don't realize these leftists, like the Democrats in the U.S., like Scholz in Germany, the Chancellor of Germany, and the Green Party in Germany, and so many others, they give lip service to defending Ukraine. What have they done? How many totally rotten armored fighting vehicles have the French sent to Ukraine that the Ukrainians don't have? They're unusable, and the Ukrainians don't have the resources to even dispose of them. You're just dropping junk on Ukraine, right? How much of the Australian, Canadian material is even useful? So the Ukrainians, these countries, it's cheaper for them to ship this stuff to Ukraine than it is to run it through the garbage disposal, to recycle the metal and material. And so this is like Ukraine has become a dumping ground for other countries' obsolete military junk. The Ukrainians, they'll fish out of that junk pile what they can use, but it hasn't been the generosity that people made it out to be. 31 tanks, 3 years now. In a couple weeks, in 3 weeks, it's going to be 3 years of warfare of Russia invading Ukraine, and the United States. The big United States has sent 31 tanks, right? So General Kellogg is right to read that interview of the riot act Don't pass this lie to us that Biden really supports Ukraine.
Well,
it's
after
showboating.
After Biden lost, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Ukrainians themselves admitted that Biden had slow walked the assistance. I mean, frankly, I'm
Massively slow walked. In fact, the whole first month of the war, he wouldn't do a thing to them. It was Republicans in Congress concerned for the security of NATO that urged the administration. What is the administration? The first $5 billion? It's small arms and ammunition, stuff the Ukrainians didn't need. They needed heavy weapons, artillery and artillery ammunition. So it was Great Britain under Boris Johnson. It was Sweden. It was Poland, really pushing on the United States to threatening to publicly embarrass the Biden administration before these tokens were sent. In fact, that's how the HIMARS were sent, which became decisive. By the way, we sent 12, then it was 20, and those HIMARS changed the war. We didn't realize that it would. And the first, when Ukraine asked for them, what was the Pentagon? What was General Milley's answer? That President Biden told him, no, we're not sending you HIMARS. We're not sending you that. Well, guess what? We did. We ended up, because the British and the Poles were going to embarrass us with it. So all right, we'll send 12. We thought it wouldn't matter because the Russian S-400 system could intercept the HIMARS rockets. Guess what? The Russian S-400 couldn't do it. So there, all of a sudden, one by one, the Ukrainians were wiping out, all of the Russian ammunition depots for their artillery offensive. They shut down the Russian offensive with those things. 12 of them. Imagine that, because it's a rocket that can hit a dining room table at 80 miles. And that means you can hit an ammo dump. And the Russians had to take all their ammo and they had to put it further back, which meant they just had a slower feeding of ammunition into the battle, which really crippled their offensive. And this was not intentional by the Biden administration. They didn't intend that out. And I'm sure, I am absolutely sure that Putin was furious. But Biden would say, look,
when you look at Joe Biden as senator, when it came to foreign policy, frankly, I'm surprised he was cajoled into doing anything, even with sanctions on China and Russia, of course. Because look at his record in the U.S. Senate and then as vice president.
Oh, yes, the Bukowski files. The Bukowski files.
Yeah. Look,
this guy, 40 years ago, 45 years ago, as a senator, Biden was telling the Central Committee of the Communist Party Soviet Union, I'm really your friend. I have to say bad things about you, but don't believe it. I'm really on your side.
Yeah,
this is in the Bukowski files. Look it up.
Yeah. That was dated, not to interrupt for the audience, that's dates from 1979, and that has been translated. It's on the Bukowski file website, translated from the original Cyrillic script. It's been reported in some conservative publications, but that's about it. And I got to be
who does that? Who goes to the Soviet Union as a leader of a Senate delegation and tells them, I'm really your guy?
Yeah.
Who does that?
Said, I'm not going to do anything about human rights violations. I'm going to pretend to slap you on the wrist, but in reality, we're not going to rock the boat. That's basically what he said. One of our shows, I read it verbatim to the audience, and I'm frankly surprised the Republicans didn't use that as a campaign tool to just beat the head of Biden. And Biden, out of all the Democratic candidates, he was my least favorite, actually, to be honest.
Oh my gosh, how can you have in that clown show, there's the sad clowns and there's the happy ones, but they're all clowns.
He was the worst. But
he was the senile clown, which really, this is what we saw that so subverted their election attempt here, that oh no, but Joe Biden is great, he's going to run again, and they were all behind him, and then all of a sudden, like a switch flipped.
Yeah.
They panicked and realized this guy isn't good for another go. But he wasn't in 2020. He wasn't.
No.
They were injecting him with something to get him through the debates, but this guy was not fully functional, and they didn't care.
Stressed.
They didn't care. And look at the vice president he had. Kamala Harris. Does anyone think this woman is that bright enough to be president, to have all that on her plate?
She struck me as very inauthentic and very opportunistic.
Well, that's
Very
the other
bad.
thing, is not only not that bright, but very phony. Very phony. With the communists, I mean, look at our friend Trevor Loudon. I mean, it's absolutely pervasive. This woman has come out of a communist milieu, was part of these communist camps when she was a kid, right? I mean, and why doesn't anybody even talk about that? We can't talk about the fact that these people have communist background, that this is the milieu here in America, American communist milieu, and the communist movement is worldwide, is connected to Beijing. Hello, it's connected to Moscow. Hello.
Well, it goes back to the fact that they put us to sleep in a Soviet victory in the late 1980s. We've talked about this many times.
You mean the Soviet supposed defeat?
Well, it was a Soviet victory, in my opinion. Even they portrayed it as a defeat, but it was a victory.
Well, the collapse of I mean, it's so complicated because the Berlin Wall came down and everybody was cheering. In a way, what they did, in chess, we have this expression, a poison pawn, right? Mm-hmm. You seem to make a mistake. You leave a pawn hanging and the other guy grabs it. And he doesn't see 4 moves down the line, you've got him into trouble because he took that bait. It's a poison pawn. That was what it was intended to be. And you read Golitsyn, you read Shana talking about a faking of the collapse of the Warsaw Pact. In 1982 and 84, these defectors both talked about faking the collapse of the Warsaw Pact. Then it happens a few years later. Gorbachev is as phony as a $3 bill. There's something wrong with him. Oh, we're wonderful. We like it. To George H.W. Bush's credit, he was more leery of Gorbachev than Reagan was. But in the end, they all succumbed. They couldn't resist it, declaring war in the Cold War. And of course, I think what I was told by a disgruntled KGB officer years later is that, well, we were going to screw you with that. We were going to unite Germany, only our agents would control Germany, as they think they largely control it now, and we were going to break up NATO. But it didn't work out. The plan backfired all the way back to the breakup of the Soviet Union. They controlled the backfire. You can set a fire to stop a fire, and they had their own controlled opposition. But as the Euromaidan revolution unfolded in 2014, they could not. Ukraine was the Achilles heel of the Soviet Union. And that's what exploded on them. And Georgia also, they've had a struggle there. And a little bit in some Central Asian republics. The Baltic states broke away. Mm-hmm. So they've had problems. So it wasn't, it's like with Leonid Shabarshin, the head of the KGB, well, the head of the first chief directorate at the time, the PGU, told this KGB officer when he asked him, are we defeated? And he said, well, we've suffered some setbacks, but our plan is good. So where can we move this KGB and Communist Party money to own all these positions in the West, to get into businesses, to get in with Western businessmen, to be able to influence them? Because now that the West thinks that the Soviet Union is down for the count, their guard is not going to be up. We're going to be able to get in there. We're going to be able to influence their politics. We can get leftists to come to power. People who, like Macron in France, call himself a Maoist and has brought France so close to China. People like Scholz, who was basically an East Bloc stooge during the Cold War, who's now the Chancellor of Germany, and the Green Party that follows his party line. I mean, do you think these people actually follow this party line because they spontaneously believe these idiotic things that have crippled Germany? Don't you think Moscow wants Germany crippled and dependent on their gas? Because a crippled Germany means all the technology in Germany, which can't be used there because they don't have the energy to build any industries in Germany, all that technology is going where? It's flowing into China. All of Germany's technology and precision instruments are going to China because you can't build anything in Germany because the fuel costs, because of the Green Party, are astronomical.
Well, that's what led to the
deindustrializing
nuclear power. Was Green Party pressure. You have Keir Starmer. There is really a lot of questions about his background in the late 1980s, serving or staying at a Czechoslovak communist youth training camp. You mentioned Scholz. He was involved in exchange delegations back in the day with the East Germans. The list goes on and on. Now there's talk, of course, speaking of the gas pipeline, of reactivating the gas supplies between Russia and the rest of Europe. So yeah, the Trump administration has a serious plate that they need to contend with. Of course, the audience would ask me what do I think. It is too early to tell. There's a lot of promise in the Trump cabinet as far as national security and foreign policy goes. But we also have to see if others, like Tulsi Gabbard, for example, becomes the head of the DNI. So we have to wait and see. But I will say with partially cautious optimism, there are some people that have an understanding of the threat of Russia and China in the cabinet on issues of trade and on the issues of defense and intelligence. So at least hopefully we can sleep a little better at night in that respect. And look, I'm politically homeless. For those of you who are new to the show, I'm not sycophantic to any candidate. I call balls and strikes. If either side does things good, you've heard
no sycophants, please. No sycophants.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I've seen a lot of bad crap. I was an active Republican, and I've seen a lot of bad stuff. I've seen
Look, there's nothing wrong. Look, I'm a Republican now. I had not been for a long time because I was so disgusted with what they were doing. But look, there's nothing wrong with supporting the better party.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with that. But and as far as being politically homeless, in a sense, all thinking people in a world of largely people who go along to get along and don't think are in a way homeless.
Yeah.
I think it's just the nature of, and the idea is if you have your own thought and you go, wait a minute, to the group, I have some reservations, then they all look at you and go, oh, what a scandal. You don't all agree with us. You're insulting us by disagreeing. No. I'm just trying to think this through. This is how you get crucified. This is how you get ostracized. And you do. Anybody who joins a group, obviously it's nice to be in a cocoon with a group, people who are being kind to you and supportive of you, but you're going to lose that support if you speak your mind. Yeah.
Yep. You are. Yeah.
You are.
Yeah. Some people are cool. They'll accept you regardless and respect your intellect. But, look, as long as your goals are the same, my goals are simple. It's very similar to yours in the respect that we want to defend and preserve the United States in perpetuity. That's always been my goal, is defending the national interest. Same with you. If Trump does something correct, like let's take his first administration. I just dropped an essay on the things I agreed with in his first term on national security and things I disagreed with. One of the most transformative things he did, one of the best things he did foreign policy-wise, was getting out of the INF treaty. Beautiful thing. No other American.
It was very, very important.
Extremely important. It was transformative. That was an albatross, that agreement.
The Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement would prevent the United States from reintroducing tactical nuclear or nuclear weapons to Europe that could neutralize the Russians. Because that's basically what we have to do if we want to stop them. Because if they were to break through in Ukraine, NATO cannot make a front with as many troops in it to defend Europe as Ukraine has, believe it or not. NATO is just not there yet. They need to be there, but they're not. And Russia doesn't have the inhibition they have in Ukraine against the NATO countries. Russia can use nuclear weapons against NATO.
And they could very well.
And that's one thing they don't dare do in Ukraine, because it would turn the Russian people against the war. But in against NATO, with all the lies they're willing to tell about NATO aggression, this is crazy.
Which is so ironic, because many of the NATO countries gave Russia under Putin the wherewithal. I mean, France and Germany, up until the Ukraine invasion, were supplying at times samples of outright weapons, destroyers, and all kinds of other literally weapons, not even dual-use technology. So yeah, I always kind of wince when people say, "Oh, it's NATO's fault," or "Oh, it's the United States."
Oh,
Well, wait a minute. You
NATO
look, our
aggression.
policies have long been very inconsistent. It's not monolithic,
Hey,
and
look, the idea that NATO is an aggressive alliance now that wants to destroy Russia. If NATO wanted to destroy Russia, then how come they let their militaries go? How come they don't have the military infrastructure to keep up with Russia in artillery shell production? How come all their militaries are rotted through and they've neglected their logistics and their equipment? I mean, the French military is really not, I mean, the German military is just not there. They have a tank battalion that can't function. They've got U-boats that I don't know when the last time the U-boats were functional. I think the last time was when Ursula van der Leyen was defense minister. Van der Leyen was defense minister. That was the last time the U-boats worked.
yeah.
And so the thing is German military, I mean, Germany is the most powerful, was at least the most richest, most advanced country in Europe, and they don't have a military that would function. Poland was going to build up, and then the Law and Justice Party lost. So I think the Polish military buildup's been canceled. And France was supposedly going to correct its military. I don't think they have. Britain has been building down to some extent. I mean, Italy and Spain are way under on their defense spending, and you know the countries that are really coming up are Finland and Sweden. Well, look at how small they are.
Mm-hmm.
Sweden's tiny. I mean, compared, what is the population of Sweden? 12 million people. You know, I mean, that's going to compensate for countries like Germany with 80 million people and France with 60 something million people and the UK with 60 something million people. That's going to compensate for the failures of these other countries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the United States, look, I said this before, in the 1960s, in terms of strategic infrastructure, we spent the equivalent of $7-something trillion to set up NORAD, to set up our missile forces, our strategic bomber forces, our submarine forces, the boomers that carry the nukes with the intermediate range nuclear rockets on them. We set that's what that cost in the 60s. And that infrastructure for building that is gone. So our commitment to rebuilding that infrastructure, to having a nuclear deterrent, is only 1.2 trillion. When the commitment in the 60s was, in current dollars, 7 trillion. It's 1.2 trillion. We need to increase by a factor at least of 5 that commitment to have the security we had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. That's what we need. Is anybody stepping up on this? Are they?
Well, I will.
You want
I
your
will
grandchildren to survive, to live under these? Well, they'd be exterminated. The Chinese want the land.
Well, one of the things that the Trump has proposed on the campaign trail that I strongly agreed with was his concept, and completely American-made, Iron Dome over America. And I think that's a huge start. Hopefully, we could get some movement in the appropriations for to have that built, because that would be an excellent first start.
Somebody should start a committee and should get General Van Herk, former commander of Northcom and NORAD, get him to head it. He really is concerned about the security of North America, and get one of his Canadian deputies to join in, get Canada into this. Get the Canadians off this anti-American nonsense. Trump is a jokester and a provocateur. Put away your anti-American resentments. The United States isn't going to annex Canada.
They're not going to be any better with Xi Jinping. They're going to be a lot worse.
Oh, good grief! The Chinese have taken over. When I was in Toronto, I was told by a former leading conservative politician that you got to tell your American friends Canada's been colonized by China. It's already a done deal. She told me, she said, you look at this room, and I'm sitting in the Albany Club, and this is a conservative, this British imperialism is celebrated on all the walls. There's pictures of Queen Victoria. You stand up and you sing God Save the King in there. And she's saying, all these people think that the left is going to get thrown out of power. And she said, I'm not so sure these people are right. And see, that's the thing that we don't understand, is the infiltration of Mexico and Canada. All these people like Tucker Carlson, oh, NATO surrounding Russia. Surrounding Russia? Russia is 11 time zones. What do you mean surrounding it? It's huge. Nobody says there's China on the other side, Central Asia. How is it surrounded? Are we colonizing the Arctic? The
Well,
people
here
being
you
surrounded
mentioned
is the
Tucker
United States.
Carlson.
It's their bases in Nicaragua. It's Cuba. It's the infiltration of Mexico and Canada. The United States is being surrounded, our own hemisphere. General Laura Richardson said, the Russians and Chinese are moving into our backyard in Latin America, and they're taking over everywhere, and they're moving in. She said that 3 years ago. The commander of Southcom, a 4-star American general, said this. I'm not making it up. Look it up.
I know. They have the bases in Cuba, in Nicaragua, in Venezuela. They are aligned still with terrorist movements. Absolutely correct. You mentioned Tucker Carlson. This is one last point before we wrap up. He's an example of this right-left nexus there. You look at who he lauds on his shows, like Mr. Sachs, who just loves China, loves Russia, thinks
hold on, stop. I missed that. Are you telling me Tucker Carlson is positive on Jeffrey Sachs?
Yes.
What?
I believe so.
Jeffrey Sachs is a Chinese shill.
Let me look
He's
this
practically an agent of Beijing. How can Tucker Carlson sit down with this man and be friendly with him? What is wrong with Carlson?
Hold on. Let me double check.
Yeah, double check. That would be crazy if that were true. I know he's been soft on Putin. He's been soft on. On
Tucker Carlson Network, Jeffrey Sachs, The Untold Story of the Cold War CIA. That's right on Tucker Carlson's. Yep, that's right. Here it is. Yep, that's what I thought. Yep.
Put a link in this video on that. I want people to be able to see that, because look, Tucker Carlson now is fronting for a Beijing shill. He talks to Alexander Dugin, who's a KGB agent, an old KGB agent who's really just subverting. He wants to destroy America.
I just put it in the chat.
Yeah. So he's talking to the Chinese too. So Tucker Carlson is engaging in.
But you look at the PSL, the Party of Socialism and Liberation. They're the ones, along with the People's Forum, which is tied with Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran. They're rioting the streets against Trump cities coast to coast. Well, the PSL, its head has, or had at least, a show on Sputnik, on Russian media, state media, that they're inviting all the QAnon people and elements of the, quote, far right onto their program, the Texas independence groups, the QAnons, and the elements of MAGA that are more in the pro-Russian camp and whatnot. So yeah, this is to close off on Tucker Carlson. He has turned out to be a huge disappointment on some of the foreign policies issues here. Yeah, so I just sent you Jeffrey Sachs, where he's interviewed by Tucker Carlson on Jeffrey Sachs, The Untold History of the Cold War CIA.
See, the thing is that they make the CIA, which is largely a problematic organization that was penetrated by the KGB, manipulated, fooled, lost over and over again, was never able to really penetrate Moscow, always being tricked and fooled. They got rid of James Angleton at the end of 1974-75. Right after Nixon, they got rid of him. They dissolved the counterintelligence staff, which had all the understanding of how the Soviet strategy worked and how the penetrations and how the moles worked and the war of the moles. They destroyed this. And so they're going to make the organization, the CIA, the organization, the gang that couldn't shoot straight, the guys that got penetrated, the guys that got tricked, the guys that got corrupted by Chinese and Soviet drug trafficking, got lured and turned. They're going to say they're the big villains, not the people that subverted the CIA, not the people that penetrated the CIA and used the CIA against America. It's the CIA. They're the ones doing everything. That just makes me angry to see that level of bad analysis and misunderstanding promoted again and again. You see it on the right. You see it on all these podcasts. The CIA, the CIA, the CIA. Now, forget about the CIA. They're a bunch of idiots. Yeah. They never got it right. It's the KGB. You go to a good historian, and I saw this. It was on that really excellent podcast that young man does. He's got a Jewish name. Sorry, I'm not. He interviewed this leading intelligence historian, and he says to him at the beginning, he goes, "Well, who's been the best intelligence service over the last 100 years? Who has it been?" "Oh, well, it's the Russians. It's the KGB. It's the GRU." And he goes on this long thing about how, well, they make mistakes and stuff, but compared to everybody else's mistakes. And you read the history of World War II, you read the history of the Cold War, you read the memoirs of people like Peter Wright, the deputy head of MI5. You read the books that Edward J. Epstein did, both his book on Snowden, which is shocking, and his book on Angleton, Deception, and all the other better work that's done in this area. And you realize, well, look at even the book on the CIA, the big one. Now I'm forgetting the title, where they had all these files on the CIA released in the 90s, and it was the Legacy of Ashes is the book, and it's Weiner, right, that wrote that book, and I read that book, and it was exactly what I expected. When all these files come out, it was one bungle, one blunder, one mistake after another. And what are they doing? They're covering up their mistakes. The CIA's cover-up thing, they're not covering up the fact that they're against America. They're covering up the fact that they bungled everything. They want to look good. I mean, it's this book, Blowing My Cover, by the CIA. This lady CIA operative that has really literary talent. I forget her name. Amy. People can look it up on Amazon. Blowing My Cover. Brilliant book. Brilliant lady. She joined the CIA. And what does she do as a CIA operative? She has a Bulgarian boyfriend who she's not supposed to have, and she's really angry because all these other CIA officials, have foreign nationals, lovers that are foreign nationals, right? And they're not supposed to. They're supposed to report it. And she's going, I report this, I get into trouble that I have a Bulgarian boyfriend, and all these other people are doing it and not reporting it. She just said, forget it. So she's sent to Macedonia to be a CIA officer in Macedonia, but she's not in Macedonia. She's being paid to be spying in Macedonia, but she's in Bulgaria at her boyfriend's mother's house. I mean, she says this in the book, and she does this for years. And finally, she gets caught. They catch her. They realize she's in Bulgaria when she's supposed to be in Macedonia. So do they fire her? I mean, imagine this. I'm working for the CIA. I'm supposed to be working in this country, and I'm not even in the country. I'm at my boyfriend's house goofing off. My boyfriend's mother's house goofing off. And so what did she do? She goes, okay, I felt guilty. And they slapped her on the wrist. They didn't fire her. So I'm going to try. So she goes to Macedonia. She does her job. She infiltrates these militias. She hangs out at these bars. She talks to these guys. I guess, she gets them to admit things. And she makes, of course, now it's after 9/11, and we're fighting Al-Qaeda. And she gets in contact with this Al-Qaeda guy who wants to defect. He wants to become an agent. She can recruit him. So she tells her boss, look, we can penetrate Al-Qaeda in the Balkans. And he says, oh, I don't know. I'll run this by headquarters. You know what, CIA headquarters, when they had an opportunity to recruit an Al-Qaeda person in the Balkans, an Al-Qaeda operator, stay away from him. He's a dangerous terrorist. That was it for her. She quit. Why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. Because the management in Langley was risk averse. I mean, I'm summarizing the book. It's a longer, more complicated story than that. But you have to read the memoirs of people who've been in the CIA. You have to talk to them, have dinner with them, talk to KGB people, talk to GRU defectors. You'll see a different picture than most people think. And so if Tucker Carlson's interviewing Jeffrey Sachs, and Jeffrey Sachs, CIA is evil and the Chinese and the Russians are not so bad. If there's a war, Jeffrey Sachs had better flee to Cuba or China. You better flee, Mr. Sachs. If there's a war in this country, you better flee. Because there's many citizens here who will not tolerate the kind of agent of influence you are for our enemies. We're not going to accept it if there's war.
There's quite a few of those. You and I have written about that.
There's many of them.
I've named names in my books, and I use a lot of evidence.
And they can come after us, but you know what? There's more of us in the end than there is of you traitors, because most people are normal. They're not psychopaths who've sold out their country for money or position or power. There's many of those. Yeah.
Oh, there are many of us, and that is the good news.
Yeah, and we're gonna see who those people are as this whole period of history unfolds. We're gonna see it. We are.
Indeed. Do you have any concluding remarks, Jeff? This has been an exciting show, very spirited, very informative. You letting us know things that we're not aware of. Any concluding remarks, and where can people find your books and your essays?
jrnyquist.blog, jrnyquist.blog. You can look at my books on Amazon, the J.R. Nyquist page on Amazon. Books like The Lies We Believe In, The Fool and His Enemy. I love The Fool and His Enemy. It's my favorite book that I wrote. But those are, the New Tactics of Global War. That's another good one. So I'm just saying, check it out. Be informed.
Very good. Thank you for joining us, Jeff. Really appreciate it. It was a pleasure meeting you in person finally earlier this month. We had some really good shows together. I know you were in transition with a bunch of things going on, so I wanted to give you your space. I'm glad you're back in the saddle on the show here, and I expect to hear quite a bit from you in the coming months and years, and hopefully on the national security and defense and intelligence front. Hopefully the Trump victory will put us on a better path. Thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us, and have a great night. Be safe. God bless. Be good to one another. Take care.